They are born beneath sealed vaults, their first cries echoing through iron cathedrals where even the walls bear the sigils of secrecy. Their eyes are bound before they can open them, their names erased before they can be spoken. For they are navigators, the Imperium's most necessary abomination. Each bears a third eye in the center of the forehead, hidden behind veils and augmetic masks. To glimpse it without sanction is to lose your mind. To open it is to see the galaxy not as light and matter but as screaming current and madness, the Imperium itself. Navigators are the bridge between reality and the warp, steering ships through seas of nightmare. Without them, the Imperium would collapse in silence, its worlds drifting apart like dying embers. But what happens when the navigator looks too long? When the eye that guides begins to see what it should not? The warp hungers for those who dare to stare back. And sometimes it answers. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to glimpse eternity and lose yourself within it, stay till the end. Like, share, and subscribe your vigilance, because in this tale, the Emperor's light is not salvation. It's the only thing keeping you from falling forever. The first thing Seren Valka ever remembered was the sound of whispering machines. Not voices, not lullabies. Machines. Soft murmurs of data streams and respirators, the click of surgical arms folding away after each adjustment. She was born beneath a steel vault that never saw sunlight, in the deepest sanctum of House Orpheon, one of the 1,000 Navi's nobilite dynasties that kept the Imperium alive. The air there was never warm. Every breath tasted faintly of metal and incense. The navigators did not speak of birth as blessing. It was obligation, mutation, sanctified by survival. The moment the Medicae confirmed the mark of the third eye, Serene's name was entered into the Vault Codex. Her body became property. Her future, a trajectory already mapped by ancestors who had long since merged with their own gene charts. As a child, she was taught silence before speech. The tutors, robed figures with eyes stitched shut, trained her in sensory focus, teaching her to hear the echo of movement in air, to feel distance as vibration on skin. They called it preparation for sight. For in the House Orpheon vaults, children were not permitted to open their eyes freely until their 7th year. Until then, they wore silk bindings tight enough to ache, perfumed with sanctified oil to calm the mind. At night, she dreamed of light she had never seen. She could feel it even through the blindness, a slow pulse beneath her skull, like a distant star pressing against her from the inside. Sometimes she thought it whispered. Other children wept in their sleep. Some never woke again. The overseers called that the culling of unworthy vessels. When her bindings were finally removed, the pain was exquisite. Light was agony, shapes blurred into radiance. She screamed until her throat tore. The instructors held her upright as she convulsed, forcing her to stare into the lumen globes. Adaptation, they said. Every eye must first learn to burn. But that was not her true sight. That came years later, when they led her into the navigator's sanctum for the first time, a circular chamber lined with glass tubes filled with viscous gold. The air thrummed with low hymns. In the center stood a throne of bone and brass, its back curved like a spinal column. The tutor's voice echoed through the silence. You will sit. You will look. You will understand what you are. They unbound the silk that still covered her forehead. Beneath it, her skin pulsed faintly, an unseen heartbeat waiting to open. The tutor pressed his hand against it, murmuring binary prayers to the machine spirit and the Emperor alike. Then he whispered, "Now, child, see." Her third eye opened. There was no color, no shape, only motion. Rivers of thought, tides of energy, 1,000 screaming voices of time itself, folding and unfolding in patterns too vast for sanity. And at the heart of it all, something bright and terrible watched her back. For a heartbeat, the world became transparent. The vault walls melted. She saw the souls of those around her as threads of light twisting into infinity. The tutor's aura flared with devotion and fear. But beyond him, beyond everything, she saw the Astronomican burning at the center of the galaxy, its radiance cutting through the warp like a spear. And inside that holy beacon, she saw a face. It was not human. It was not divine. It was vast, infinite and aware. It looked at her. And Seren Valka, first daughter of House Orpheon, screamed her name out loud for the first time. The light went out. The machines screamed in unison. When she awoke, her tutors were dead, minds burned out, eyes liquefied. And in the dark, the thing that had looked back whispered softly, "I remember you." When Seren awoke, she was floating in the amniotic suspension of a medica tank. The liquid was cool and golden, faintly luminescent like diluted sunlight. Tubes ran into her arms, her spine, the base of her skull. Each pulse through the tubing sent a whisper of warmth into her veins, a rhythm almost like breath. Her mind felt fractured, half in dream, half anchored to the flesh that confined it. Through the haze of the fluid, she saw shapes, robed figures moving with the precision of ritual. Their voices were low, mechanical, filtered through rebreathers. She could make out fragments of prayer. The Emperor's gaze sustains, the warp submits, the eye obeys. Her heart stuttered at the word "I." The last thing she remembered was the light, the face, and the scream that tore through more than just her throat. Now there was only the hum of life support and the gentle drag of gravity returning. A servo skull drifted closer to her, its optic lens flaring red. "Subject Seren Valka," it intoned in a tin whisper. Vital signs stabilized. Neural trauma, irreparable in secondary cortex. Warp interface node active. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The fluid muted her voice, her panic. She tried to move, but the tank held her still. Then faintly she heard a sound that wasn't real, a whisper threading through her pulse. "You saw me once. You will see me again." When the medici drained the tank, she collapsed onto the cold floor, trembling, blind again under the new bindings wrapped around her eyes. A tall figure approached, the scent of myrrh and metal marking him as one of the proctors of House Orpheon. His robes were stitched with silver constellations, the lineage of navigators who had guided humanity for millennia. "You survived," he said, his voice carrying neither comfort nor warmth. "Few do when the warp first notices them." Seren coughed, her throat raw. "What did I see?" The proctor knelt, placing a gloved finger beneath her chin. "You saw truth too early. The Astronomican is the Emperor's light, but it is not his alone. The warp reflects what we bring to it. You looked into the mirror without learning to close your eye." "I saw something alive," she whispered. "It looked at me." "Then it marked you," the proctor said softly. "And that is both your gift and your curse." She was taken back to her cell that night, past walls etched with crawling runes. Every step echoed through the hollow corridors like the ticking of an immense clock. She could feel eyes watching her from behind the glass, other navigators half insane, their third eyes glowing faintly through bandages. Sleep would not come. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw afterimages of that impossible face, vast and luminous, gazing through her as though through a window. She tried to pray, but the Emperor's name felt brittle in her mouth, like a word spoken into vacuum. By morning, the proctor returned, flanked by servitors carrying a ceremonial casket. Inside was a brass circlet fitted with a lens of obsidian glass. "Your veil," he said. "You will wear it always. The world must never look upon what stares through you." When the circlet settled over her brow, the whisper returned, not loud, not malicious, but curious. "Do you understand yet?" Seren swallowed hard. "No, you will." Years later, when she would finally take her place aboard an Imperial warship and open her eye again, she would remember that voice. And she would understand that it had never truly left her. It had only been waiting. The warp was alive. That was the first truth every navigator learned and the last they truly accepted. To guide a ship through it was not a science or a skill. It was a negotiation with madness. The warp was an ocean of souls, memory, hunger, and half-remembered gods, and navigators were its translators. Seren Valka stood alone in the sanctum of the Vigilant Eternus, her body secured in the navigator's throne by a dozen restraint cables. The sanctum was spherical, its walls covered in thick lead-glass panels and wards that glowed faintly blue. Beyond those windows lay the nightmare between worlds, the warp sea roiling in endless motion, streaked with light and shadow like a storm made of thought. Her breath came slow, each exhale frosting her rebreather. "Navigator Valka initiating sight," she whispered. The machine spirits of the sanctum responded in kind, their hymn rising to a low metallic hum. The brass veil across her forehead began to warm. Behind it, her third eye stirred. She felt the shift before she opened it. A tension, a pulling inside her skull as if her thoughts were being unspooled. The warp called to her, not in words but in emotion. Awe, fear, memory, desire. She opened her eye and the void bloomed before her like a wound torn through reality. For a moment, it was beautiful. Rivers of light flowed across the endless dark, the Astronomican shining like a golden pillar at the galaxy's heart. It pulsed steady and immense, its radiance the only constant in a storm of chaos. The Emperor's beacon. The thought of it brought tears to her human eyes, though her warp eye saw differently. Through it, the Astronomican was no longer a flame, but a face. She blinked. The illusion didn't fade. The light looked back. It wasn't the same presence she had felt as a child. This one was colder, more deliberate. It didn't observe. It studied. She felt the weight of its attention, heavy as gravity. Somewhere in the warp, the ship shuddered. Warp current destabilizing, came the voice of Magos Kale over the Vox, metallic and strained. Fluctuations increasing beyond prediction. Do you require recalibration? No, Seren whispered. Hold course. The face within the Astronomican shifted, not moving but changing expression. A flicker of what could almost be recognition. Her heart pounded. The threads of light that made up the warp began to twist, spiraling toward the ship like roots of fire. Alarms flared. Machine spirits wailed in digital agony. Translation corridor collapsing. Kale's voice rose to a roar. Navigator, disengage! Cut sight. But Seren couldn't. Something in that gaze pinned her in place, a mixture of fear and fascination that felt more human than anything she'd known in years. The light whispered in rhythm with her heartbeat. You're late, it said. And suddenly the Astronomican pulsed. Once, hard. Every lumen in the sanctum blew out. The warp turned black. Then from the dark a second light appeared, smaller, closer, not the Emperor's, something else. Something following them. Serene gasped as her restraint snapped tight around her chest. She tried to close her third eye, but it refused. The small light grew, flickering like a heartbeat. And in it she saw movement, a shape unfolding. Wings made of thought, eyes within eyes. The Geller field howled as it strained against something pressing in from all sides. The Vox filled with screams, mortal voices and machine spirits alike. The ship was being pulled not by gravity but by attention. And all the while that voice, low, patient, and utterly calm, echoed inside her skull. Do you see me now, little eye? You never stopped looking, the void screamed. Not through sound, but through sensation. Like every atom of the ship, every molecule of her flesh was being dragged through memory and flame. The vigilant Eternus groaned as the Geller field stuttered, a shimmering veil between nightmare and reality. Sparks danced along the sanctum's walls. Prayers spilled from the Vox systems in looping binary tones. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. The Emperor... Until the words melted into static. Seren tried to breathe, but the air had turned thick, alive. Her veins pulsed with molten gold. She reached for the override sigils on her throne, fingers trembling. But the circuits beneath them pulsed in response, as if the ship itself was aware, watching. Do not fight it, the voice whispered. You already opened the door. Let me through, her third eye burned. Behind the veil, the lidless gaze widened until light spilled down her face in rivulets. It wasn't blood. It was thought leaking out as luminous tears. The second light outside, the intruder swelled. It wasn't a star, nor a warp beast, nor a fragment of the Astronomican. It was a consciousness, vast and cold, moving with the slow grace of inevitability. The warp around it bent like fabric under the weight of a falling god. She saw its edges now, serrated and endless, its body shaped from the memory of a galaxy's worth of nightmares. You called to me when you were still blind, it murmured, not in words but in emotion. You wanted to understand the fire you serve. I can show you. She screamed as visions flooded in. A cascade of lives lived and lost in the warp. She saw other navigators, each steering their ships through oblivion, their third eyes glowing like distant stars. She saw what the warp saw when they opened those eyes. Tiny, flickering sparks of awareness shining for moments before being snuffed out by the sea of madness. She felt what it felt, the hunger of the Imperium itself, the desire not to destroy but to know. The ship bucked violently, throwing Magos Kale and his crew across the command decks. Power conduits burst into flame and the machine spirits wailed. Navigator! Shut your sight. You're tearing us apart. Serene tried to close her mind, but her eye, her curse, stayed open. The presence pressed closer, its voice cutting through the noise. You navigate the Emperor's light, but you do not see what burns inside it. He calls to us too, her body convulsed. The sanctum's walls began to bleed light, symbols flaring like living veins. She realized the warp wasn't outside anymore, it was inside the ship. Every bulkhead, every servo skull, every breath of air had begun to shimmer, folding and unfolding like something remembering how to be alive. Through the crackling storm, she heard Kale's last coherent Vox command. All hands, prepare for blind translation.
By the throne, get us out!
But the translation drive didn't answer. The ship didn't want to leave. Serene felt the thrumming of the warp synchronizing with her pulse. The vigilant Eternus had stopped being a vessel. It was now her body. She could feel the agony of ruptured hull plates like torn skin, hear the dying crew's screams as echoes in her blood. And through it all, the presence, patient, tender, consuming, spoke again. Every path leads to sight. Every eye must open. You were made to see what even gods cannot bear to witness. Outside the sanctum, the void rippled. The Astronomican flickered, eclipsed by something darker. Serene's human eyes filled with tears. Please, she whispered, voice breaking. I don't want to see anymore. The whisper answered with something like a smile. Then let me see for you. The warp flared white, and the vigilant Eternus vanished. When the scanners on nearby ships registered the event, it appeared not as an explosion, but as a single note, a pulse of light that sang through the void like a heartbeat. And far away on Terra itself, for less than a second, the Astronomican dimmed. No one knew how long they had been lost. Time inside the warp was never real, but now it had stopped pretending altogether. The vigilant Eternus drifted through a sea of endless color. Violet storms blooming and dying without sound, rivers of molten thought winding through the dark like veins. Every chronometer aboard had failed. Every hour felt like days. Days like years. Years like the pause between two heartbeats. The crew had stopped marking time long ago. In the command decks, candles replaced lumen strips. Men prayed not to the Emperor, but to anything that might be listening. The Vox carried whispers, some mechanical, some human, all wrong. Doors opened to corridors that no longer matched the ship's architecture. Some ended in mirrors, others in eyes. And at the center of it all sat Seren Valka, suspended in her sanctum, her body bound to the throne by cables that pulsed faintly with life. Her third eye had not closed in weeks, or what passed for weeks here. It glowed like an open wound. Her skin was pale, veins shot through with faint light, her voice reduced to a whisper the ship could hear even when she did not speak. Course vector, uncertain, guidance, failing. The ship answered her in tone, not language. Bulkheads groaned softly as if in sympathy. The navigator's chamber had become its heart. The machine spirits that once served her now moved with her heartbeat. The distinction between vessel and pilot was fading. She tried to remember the last time she had heard another human voice. Magos Kale, perhaps, or the chaplain. Their faces flickered behind her eyes, warped into dreamlike echoes. Had they died? Had she dreamed them dying? Her own mind began to fold inward. The warp murmured constantly, a choir of suggestion. She saw images that were not hers. Worlds burning, cities sinking into oceans of glass, children born blind to light. The voices spoke to her in tongues she almost understood. Guide us, remember the path. Keep your eye open. Her body trembled. The warp pressed against her skull like a tide rising to drown her. She felt its hunger. Not hatred, just need. It wanted her sight. It wanted to see through her. She whispered a prayer she no longer believed. The Emperor protects. Something answered. But it was not the Emperor. It was the same voice that had haunted her since childhood. Deep and quiet, like the echo of her own breath in a cathedral. You guide them through my veins and call it faith. But it is I who carry you, Seren Valka. I who cradle your kind in the dark. Her heart pounded. What are you? What you will become. The sanctum dimmed. The warp pressed closer. Across the ship the crew began to bleed from their eyes. They dreamed of golden corridors and a woman's voice whispering their names in languages they had never spoken. Some walked into the walls and did not come out. Others tore out their eyes, claiming they saw light behind their skulls. In the silence that followed, the vigilant Eternus drifted on, dead engines humming with the rhythm of a heartbeat that was no longer mechanical, and at its center, Serene opened her mouth and sang. It was not a song of navigation. It was a song of memory, of every soul that had ever burned to keep humanity moving. The warp listened, and it began to sing back. The song spread through the ship like infection. Those who still lived felt it reverberate in their bones, a low harmony that replaced the beating of their hearts. The air shimmered, bending around each note. The corridors pulsed in rhythm, the ship's structure flexing as though made of flesh. The vigilant Eternus was no longer merely traveling through the warp. It was becoming part of it. Seren Valka sat motionless at the center of that transformation, her body locked into the throne by cables that had grown into her spine. Every breath was pain, every thought a ripple of color. Her human eyes had withered away, leaving only the warp eye, permanently open, its pupil fractal and endless. The light that spilled from it painted her face in gold and blue and scarlet. She had stopped thinking of the warp as separate from herself. It was a presence that spoke without sound, infinite and intimate. "You guide the dead through me," it murmured. "Now I will show you where they go." Visions surged through her, souls slipping through the warp's currents, some dissolving instantly, others drifting toward unseen destinations, points of gravity shaped like faith, hatred, hope. She saw the traces of the Astronomican piercing those currents, binding the galaxy's madness to the will of a single dying god. And beyond even that, deeper still, she glimpsed something vast moving behind the Emperor's light. She felt her throat tighten. No more, but the presence would not stop. "You wanted truth," it whispered. "You asked to see the stars as they see you, and they do. They always have." She saw them, every star in the galaxy, each one burning not from fusion but from worship, every flare a prayer, every collapse a scream. They were alive, watching, remembering. The Navigator screamed, and her voice became the ship's. The vigilant Eternus shuddered, hull plating tearing like skin. Reality folded outward, showing glimpses of impossible geometry. Arches made of screaming light, oceans of crystal shadow. The warp flooded through, and still the song continued, louder, purer, irresistible. On the upper decks, the survivors fell to their knees, hands pressed to their temples, their minds filled with visions of gold and bone. They saw Seren's face in the void, radiant and monstrous, her expression serene. "She's guiding us," one of them murmured. "She's showing us the way." "The way to what?" another asked. "To where all paths end." The warp surged again, and for a heartbeat every mind aboard became one. They felt each other's fear, their despair, their small fragile love of life. The warp drank it all in like breath, and in return it gave them silence. Serene felt it then, the final thread of her humanity stretching thin. The ship's heart beat in time with hers. The stars pulsed around her like eyes opening. Somewhere far beyond, the Astronomican flickered once more, as if to acknowledge her. And then the voice that had haunted her since birth spoke one last time. "You are ready. The map is complete. Become what you were born to be." Her third eye widened. Light poured from it in a perfect column, piercing through the ship, through the warp, through the veil of real space itself. Outside, the vigilant Eternus was seen, just once, by a passing Imperial patrol. A single flash of golden light across the void, followed by a shockwave of distorted reality that scrambled every auger array for 100 million kilometers. And then, nothing. No ship. No trace, only a faint echo on the long-range Vox. A woman's voice, calm, eternal, whispering the coordinates of a place that did not exist. "Follow the light. It is not the Emperor's alone." They said the vigilant Eternus had vanished, but in truth, it had only changed its nature. The ship floated somewhere beyond the edge of mapped space, suspended in a half-reality where stars bled like open wounds and time ran in spirals. Its hull, once iron and sanctified gold, now pulsed with veins of light that shimmered with thought. The banners of the Imperium still hung in its corridors, but they no longer bore the Aquila. They bore an eye, endless and unblinking. Seren Valka no longer felt the weight of her body. She existed within the vessel now, a mind woven into its circuitry, her consciousness diffused through kilometers of metal and bone. The throne that had held her was gone. In its place stood a hollow sphere of living glass, its surface rippling with images, memories, voices, dreams. Inside her the warp flowed like blood. She could hear it breathing, not as a storm now, not as chaos, but as something alive, aware, curious. It spoke through the vibrations of the ship, through the creak of bulkheads and the hum of reactors. You were made to see the path, it whispered, but every path ends where it began. Fragments of the vigilant Eternus crew remained. Some still wandered the corridors, their bodies pale and translucent, their minds caught between flesh and echo. Others had been absorbed fully, their voices joining the choir that now filled the ship's silence. They no longer spoke words, only resonance, a soft harmony that felt almost like peace. Seren remembered being human. She remembered the smell of incense, the cold metal of the Navigator's throne, the feeling of light against her eyelids. She remembered the proctor of House Orpheon telling her that her sight was a curse. And now she finally understood. Because she could not close her eye anymore, it saw everything. Past, future, life, death, the thin veil separating worship from hunger. Every star whispered. Every world cried. Every human prayer was a ripple through her veins. She had become the very map she once followed. The warp no longer resisted her. It welcomed her, shaping itself around her will. She guided the ship not by coordinates but by desire, and the warp obeyed like a lover who had been waiting for millennia. It showed her beauty, nebulae blooming like cathedrals, dead suns whispering secrets through gravity's memory, the ghosts of ancient ships drifting like forgotten prayers. But beauty in the warp was never without horror. The more she guided, the more the ship changed. Corridors fused into flesh. The decks began to pulse in time with her thoughts. Servitors sang hymns in reverse. The Mechanicus engines wept. Prometheum tears as their machine spirits dreamed of freedom. She no longer commanded the warp. She was the warp, and it was her. And then came the vision. At the farthest edge of the Imperium, where the Astronomican faded into shadow, she saw something vast, a shape too immense for comprehension. A lattice of light and decay pulsing like a heart made from galaxies. It was the Emperor's beacon, but it was changing. Its light flickered, then pulsed in patterns that matched her own heartbeat. The realization struck her like lightning. The Astronomican was not a flame lit by a god. It was a chain, and she was a link in it. She felt the pull immediately. A tether forming between her and Terra, as if her mind had been recognized by the throne itself. The presence she had seen as a child, the face within the light, was waiting for her once again. "You cannot hide forever, little eye," it whispered, voice both tender and immense. Even the Emperor must see through someone's gaze. The warp around her began to quake. The vigilant Eternus sensors, long dead, flickered to life. A distant signal, impossibly strong, was calling to her across the void. Terra. The beacon wanted her back. The signal from Terra did not fade. It grew stronger, each pulse reverberating through the warp like a heartbeat that was not her own. The vigilant Eternus trembled in response, its structure groaning as the two rhythms began to sync. The Emperor's beacon and Seren's pulse. For a moment, she felt hope. The Astronomican's light, that golden pillar of salvation, was calling her home. She imagined piercing back through the veil, returning to the known stars, hearing mortal voices again. She imagined kneeling before the throne, confessing what she had seen. But then she understood. The call was not a rescue. It was a summons. The beacon did not shine for her salvation. It burned for her submission. The ship convulsed as the warp around it rippled with waves of gold and crimson. Thousands of spectral hands clawed through the air, reaching for her, whispering the same phrase again and again. "Serve the light. Serve the light." Seren's voice cracked. "I have served. I have given everything." The voices merged into one. "Then give your sight." The Astronomican's radiance flared. The light she had once worshipped poured into the warp corridor, piercing through the vigilant Eternus like a spear. Every surface ignited, painted in holy fire. Crew phantoms screamed and vanished into brilliance. The metal of the hull softened, bending toward Terra's pull. Serene felt herself unravel. Every thought, every memory, every heartbeat pulled toward that light. She felt the throne's gravity, an infinite hunger dressed in divinity. The face she had seen as a child, the presence that had watched her all her life, now revealed itself in full. It was not the Emperor. It was the reflection of his light in the warp, the echo of a god seen through the eyes of his instruments. And like all reflections, it desired reunion with its source. "You were made to look upon me," it whispered. "Now you will become my gaze." Serene screamed, and the sound was mirrored by the ship. the warp, and even the light itself. Her flesh burst into golden flame. Her voice fractured into 1,000 harmonies. The vigilant Eternus twisted inward, folding its mass into something smaller, sharper. A single, glowing point that pulsed in time with the Astronomican. Then, silence. When the flare faded, the ship was gone. In its place drifted a perfect sphere of translucent crystal, no larger than a human heart. Inside it, faint as an afterimage, floated Seren's form. Eyes closed, expression peaceful, her third eye still open and glowing faintly from within. Across the galaxy, navigators screamed in unison. For a heartbeat, their visions aligned. Every ship, every translation through the warp, every journey guided by mortal eyes flickered with the same golden shimmer. And through that shimmer, something looked back. When the phenomenon ended, thousands of navigators were left blind. Others spoke of new visions, strange pathways across the Imperium that pulsed like living veins, leading not to Terra, but to something beyond. In the deepest chambers of the Navis Nobilite, the High Lords recorded the event as a resonance anomaly. House Orpheon was quietly erased from all records, but among those who whispered in shadow, the story endured. They said a navigator had gone too far, that she had followed the Emperor's light to where even his angels dared not look. And somewhere in the silence between stars, the new light pulsed again, steady, patient, unblinking. The galaxy had gained a new beacon, but no one could say whether it led home or deeper into the dark. When Imperial augurs detected the anomaly, they thought it a glitch, an echo in the Astronomican's field strength. The beacon had flickered before, usually during warp storms or psychic surges from the black ships. But this was different. The fluctuation was rhythmic, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat. It pulsed every 9 seconds. On Terra, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica scrambled to recalibrate their instruments. Choirs of psychers screamed in unison, their minds collapsing under the weight of something vast pressing against the veil. Reports flooded in from every segmentum, ships guiding themselves without input, navigators falling into trances, strange golden light bleeding through Geller fields. And amid the chaos, one name began to surface, Seren Valka. The Ordo Malleus declared her anathema. The Navis nobility swore she never existed. But the pattern of her psychic signature was unmistakable. Somewhere beyond the Astronomican's reach, a new light had ignited, and it was calling to them. Aboard the Saint Drevion, an inquisitorial cruiser bound for the Halo stars, Inquisitor Corda received the transmission personally. It was faint, barely coherent, a whisper woven into the static. The Vox officers strained to decode it. Through distortion, a woman's voice emerged. Do not follow the light. It does not lead home. Then, silence. Corda stared at the data slate, jaw tightening. He had heard every manner of heresy before, every demon's lie and warpborne delusion. But there was something in that voice, a stillness that didn't belong to madness. He ordered the fleet to alter course to trace the source of the transmission. The Saint Drevion dove into the warp. For days, the translation seemed smooth. The navigator reported steady passage, the Astronomican bright and unwavering. But then came the dreams. Crew members spoke of seeing corridors made of glass, veins of light crawling across their skin, a woman standing in the distance with eyes like twin suns. When they prayed to the Emperor, they said their words felt heard, not by him, by something listening through his light. By the 5th day, the Geller field began to hum out of sync. Candles burned sideways in zero gravity. The navigator refused to open his third eye, claiming there was no path left to follow, that every direction led toward a single point of gold. Like the eye of a storm, Inquisitor Corda took command of the sanctum himself. He demanded the coordinates be fixed, but when the viewports unsealed, the warp outside was not chaos. It was calm, silent, vast. And in that impossible stillness, the crew saw her, a woman, suspended in the void, light pouring from her forehead like a wound that would not heal. The glow around her shimmered in the exact frequency of the Astronomican. Her body was intact, untouched by decay, though she had been gone for what should have been centuries. Seren Valka, the navigator who had vanished. The one who had followed the Emperor's light too far. The Saint Drevion drifted closer. The Mechanicus augurs screamed warnings. The warp readings were wrong. The silence outside was not absence. It was containment. A dead zone within the warp. A perfect stillness where no god, no demon, no thought could exist. Corda stepped closer to the viewport. The light from Seren's body flickered. He heard a whisper, not through vox but through bone and blood. Every map must end where it began. The warp rippled. The Astronomican dimmed. And one by one the stars began to blink out. The stars were dying, not extinguished, but hidden, veiled beneath waves of golden static that spread outward from the body of Seren Valka. The Saint Dravion hung motionless at the edge of that radiance, its hull trembling as the warp around it folded into perfect symmetry. No storm, no madness, no shrieking demons, only silence, so absolute it felt sacrilegious. Inquisitor Corda gripped the rail of the command dais. "What is this?" he demanded. The navigator didn't answer. He was weeping, blood dripping from his sealed lids. "She's looking at us," he murmured. Through the light. Through him. On the bridge screen, Seren's body drifted closer, her hair weightless, her hands folded over her chest. Her third eye glowed softly, not with power, but with patience. Every pulse of that light matched the rhythm of the Astronomican. Every ship in range began to feel it, a pull toward her, toward the stillness. "Seal the sanctum," Corda shouted. "Raise the Geller field." But it was too late. The light breached the ship without impact or sound. Candles flickered once, and then every lumen on board turned gold. Vox channels filled with whispering voices, all speaking the same word over and over. "Home!" Crewmen fell to their knees. Tech priests opened their augmetic skulls and wept light. The navigator screamed as his third eye ignited, a column of radiance bursting from his brow to the ceiling. Through it, Serene's face appeared, not distant now, but close, impossibly close, as though the warp had folded space to place her before them. Corda raised his bolt pistol, but his hand shook. She looked at him, not with accusation, not even recognition. "Only pity. Why did you follow me?" Her voice filled the ship, soft and vast. "You were safe in your blindness, but you led us here." Corda spat. "You corrupted his light." Serene tilted her head, the motion slow, almost human. "His light is not his alone. The warp reflects what we feed it, faith, fear, hope, despair. I was born to see it. You were born to worship it. But what happens when worship becomes hunger?" The Inquisitor's vox bead crackled as thousands of voices screamed across the fleet. One by one, ships began to vanish from augur readings, swallowed by the expanding halo of gold. Corda fired. The bolt round passed through her like smoke, vanishing into the brilliance. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with the light itself. "You cannot kill what is already everywhere." The warp trembled. The Astronomican's pulse stuttered, then doubled. Somewhere across the immensity of the Imperium, psychers fainted mid-prayer. On Terra, the golden throne flickered. For one impossible instant, the Emperor's eyes opened and he looked back. The scream that followed was silent. It tore through reality itself, a wave of raw comprehension that no mind was meant to bear. For a heartbeat, every soul that had ever traveled the warp saw what Seren saw. The truth that the Astronomican was not a lighthouse guiding humanity home, but a wound, an eternal hole burning through existence to hold back something even worse. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The Saint Dravion emerged from the warp in real space, orbiting a dead, nameless world. Its hull was scorched black, its crew statues of glass, faces frozen mid-prayer. The vox logs ended with a single message, written not in words but in pulses of light, repeating endlessly, "We are found." On Terra, the Astronomican burned steadily once more. The adepts proclaimed the disturbance over. The Imperium continued. Ships sailed, faith endured, and the Emperor's light shone across the stars. But among the Navis Nobilite, a whisper spread, a heresy too dangerous to record, that somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, a second beacon now pulsed, not the Emperor's, but his reflection, and it waited for those who still dared to see.